The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to Reproaction's Act and Learn webinar that we are very excited to co-host in a special collaboration with our partners at Digital Defense Fund. Today's topic is periods, pregnancy, abortion, and your digital security. So first we'll introduce your co-host from Reproaction. The first voice you're hearing is Erin Matson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Executive Director of Reproaction. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'm on Twitter at Erin to the Max.
And the second voice you're hearing is Caitlin Fleming. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm the Outreach and Culture Manager here at Reproaction. I am based in Alexandria, Virginia, and you can find me on Twitter at @PurpleJane.
Great. And next, I'll let our Digital Defense Fund co-hosts briefly introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Kate. I'm the Director over at Digital Defense Fund, as she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you today from Washington State.
Hi, I'm Amanda Bennett. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Project Manager at Digital Defense Fund, and I'm joining from Austin, Texas.
Welcome and so glad to have you here. So agenda for you all. First, we'll introduce Reproaction. Then Kate and Amanda will lead us through a presentation on protecting your digital security. After that, Caitlin will lead us through a presentation on self-managed abortion. And then I will conclude it with next steps and Q&A. So a bit about Q&A and how that works. If you have questions for any of our presenters today, please put them into the questions tab and I will get to as many as possible at the end. So you don't have to wait until the end to start typing in questions. If you have questions, you can put them in immediately and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. You're also always encouraged to live tweet our webinars. And if you'd like to do so, we encourage you to use the hashtag Reproaction. So Reproaction leads bold action to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're extremely proud of our left flank analysis, and we are known for our willingness to hold folks on all sides of the issues we work on accountable, whether they're traditionally considered allies or opposition. And we have a deep commitment to nonviolent direct action as one of the tools in our toolbox. And with that, I will pass it over to our colleagues at Digital Defense Fund.
Excellent, thank you so much. So Digital Defense Fund, just to let folks know if you ever need to reach out, is we provide free digital security and technology support for groups within the abortion access movement. We envision a future where technology and innovation support secure, autonomous reproductive decisions free from stigma. We have a wide variety of educational resources, trainings, and we can often troubleshoot a lot of common digital security issues. So we hope that you'll reach out to us at digitaldefensefund.org if that sounds like you. So we can move on to the next slide. So doing things online feels private, but in reality, we leave traces of our data everywhere. And I'm going to give it over to Amanda to talk a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah, so everyone turns to the internet nowadays to search things from like period symptoms all the way to trying to find access to abortion. And so, as Kate mentioned, when we're online, it feels like it's just us and our search bar, and everything we're looking at is really private. So we're going to start by showing the traces of activity that we leave throughout the internet as we do those searches. So next slide. So this is a GIF or GIF of a shark biting the internet. This really helps me make digital security something that's physical rather than just something that's abstract. The internet isn't a cloud, it's cables and computers. This is one of the undersea cables that connects one continent to another and takes your internet traffic underneath the ocean. And those cables and computers are owned by mostly companies nowadays. The internet started as a project between academia and the US government, but now a lot of the undersea cables, a lot of the computers called servers that kind of run the internet are owned by private companies. Next slide. So one of the private companies that owns a lot of the servers and cables out there are internet service providers. So those are companies like Comcast, Spectrum, They'll definitely be different depending on where you live. And so once we connect to Wi-Fi, for example, this orange person might be at a cafe connecting to the Wi-Fi. Their internet traffic goes through that connection to the internet service provider, and from there to perhaps servers owned by Google if they're searching for information online about reproductive health. And as their internet traffic takes that journey, there's a variety of actors who might be curious about what they're doing online. So this illustration from the Electronic Frontier Foundation shows a few of who those actors might be. The green person is the systems administrator. So perhaps this is the person who runs the Wi-Fi at the cafe. And they could have a genuine, legitimate interest in, seeing what people are doing in order to keep the Wi-Fi running smoothly. Or they could be curious about what websites people are visiting, and they could be snooping on internet traffic just for kind of personal curiosity reasons. There's also the police and other law enforcement agencies or federal agencies. And those groups can get authorized access to our internet activity by going to a judge and getting permission for a subpoena or a warrant, or even authorization to wiretap a device. But they can also get unauthorized access, for example, by getting information in a way that's not technically authorized by the US Constitution, but we know that these agencies are constantly testing the bounds of their power. And so we hear all the time about police and law enforcement agencies buying data about people's internet activity, or asking for consent searches in situations where it's really hard for people to provide meaningful consent, like during an arrest or a border crossing. There's also completely unauthorized actors who might want our information, which are here represented by the purple hacker. So these are often financially motivated folks who could be someone else at the cafe trying to monitor other people's traffic, or could be someone trying to hack a database of usernames and passwords that they can sell online for money. So the moral of this slide is that there's lots of folks who want to look into what we're doing, in addition to, of course, the internet service provider itself. So next slide, please. So when we're thinking about those unauthorized actors, the responsibility of blocking them is shared between the platforms that we're trusting with our data and ourselves. So what the platforms control is the security of our data in transit and in storage. So that's the security of our connection over the Wi-Fi or over the internet, which could be using that HTTPS like lock icon in the corner of your browser. The security of the data storage, so trying to protect it from that hacker who's trying to steal the database of usernames and passwords. And then the platforms also control what and how they share our data with other services or entities. So of course, there might be services that get access to location metadata or our search histories, and it's up to them whether or not they decide to share that either for advertising purposes or because they get a request from law enforcement. What we control is our login, so having a long, unique password and two-factor authentication, for example, to protect our account from hackers who might try to get in that way. We control what we share with services and what we share with other users, and we control the devices we use to access those platforms. And later on in the presentation, we'll talk about various ways that you can secure those aspects of your interactions with the internet that you control. So next slide, please. So what do people do with all of this data that they're collecting while we're using the internet? A lot of it is used for targeted advertising. So pretty much everything we do online, if we're logged into Facebook, logged into Google, or just using those services, is compiled into a profile that can then be sold to advertisers so that they can try to target us more accurately. So one of the headlines that we have on this slide is period tracking apps are telling Facebook when you have sex. A lot of times apps, that you have on your phone, you're not logging in through Facebook. You didn't explicitly connect it to Facebook, but they allow Facebook to have a pixel in their app or a script in their app that lets them communicate information back to Facebook. So then you can, when you log into Facebook, you can be targeted with ads based on information that you thought you were sharing just with the app. There's also a screenshot from Coding Rights, which is a Latin American organization that does internet freedom and internet rights work. And their ad says, "Why are you seeing this green mom holding a baby vampire? Because Facebook classified you as a quote unquote green mom that likes horror movies." So they were sharing these ads to show you information about how Facebook classified you. And it can be unsettling when it's right and also unsettling when it's wrong. It's just kind of creepy altogether. And these advertisements can also be used to perpetuate really negative expectations and kind of stigma from society. As this tweet from a TV host says, Facebook ads are there to remind women that from age 27 to 37, you ought to be having kids. So there's a lot of stories too about folks who are struggling with infertility or who've had miscarriages, seeing really upsetting ads on social media because they're in this age that's assumed to be someone who wants to be a mom, and then, or they, you know, were pregnant, were searching for things about pregnancy, lost the pregnancy, but then these targeted advertisements are still showing them really triggering content. So it can be really upsetting to get these targeted ads based on data that you felt was about something really private. Next slide. So there's actually a wealth of research that's been done about periods, pregnancy, abortion, and the online data advertising economy. We don't have time to get super deep into them today, but we will share these links with you afterwards in a follow-up email. There's 2 organizations that have compiled really detailed reports about these topics. Privacy International and Coding Rights are 2 of them. So if you're curious and learning more about how your private reproductive health information ends up in a Facebook ad, definitely recommend checking out these 2 organizations. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kate to talk about some of the more nefarious ways our data can be used.
Thanks. Unfortunately, I think probably folks dialing in are familiar with some of the cases that have come through the news recently. So here we can see a Fast Company article on how an online search for abortion pills landed this woman in jail. And another one, anti-choice groups use smartphone surveillance to target abortion-minded women during clinic visits. Both of these are examples, unfortunately, of how we're kind of used to now carrying a tiny computer around with us all day long. We use it for so many very productive, very necessary things, often like searching for our abortion options. But depending on the situation in which you end up either criminalized for your behavior or targeted by anti-choice organizations, a lot of the data that phone collects then becomes weaponized against you. So we're gonna go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about some of the methods and how to mitigate. So here you can see a report from Privacy International. It says intrusive data collection software and digital marketing systems are being developed and promulgated around the world by powerful and politically connected US-based anti-abortion organizations. We're very used to using very ubiquitous tools like Google to search for everything from abortion options to period symptoms to ways to manage your own pregnancy. And unfortunately, all of that information is not only collected by, as Amanda had in her first slide, that internet service provider or other folks who have access to the kind of channel between your personal computer and the internet, but also that Google advertising is heavily utilized by a lot of folks who want to disproportionately influence the results that you see, much like we saw on the slide around Facebook ads. So on the next slide. So you can learn more about how digital evidence is also used and will be used to criminalize pregnant people. This particular article, Surveilling the Digital Abortion Diary by our colleague Cynthia Conti-Cook, is a really important context to, you hear all these different types of cases in the news about prosecution for suspicion of self-managed abortion. I actually did not know until reading a lot of the research compiled by experts like her that a disproportionate way that people are implicated for these things is actually through the information that is disclosed on a mobile device. Often folks are unaware of their rights to, refuse a search of a mobile device. You can see here in this report, mass extraction, the widespread power of US law enforcement to search mobile phones to find out more about the actual technology that's then used when a phone is disclosed, often without a warrant, to be able to take a sort of digital forensic clone of what is on that device and then use it against that person. So we're going to be talking in subsequent slides about how to mitigate some of the risks that come from that common scenario, as well as any others that do come up as the kind of legal ramifications around abortion to continue to change all the time. So next slide, please. So we discussed a little bit as one example, but who else can be affected by this kind of surveillance of abortion seeking? And there's individuals who are researching their abortion options online. There are folks who are seeking support for an abortion or even just a regular pregnancy experience, or thinking that they might be pregnant in online forums. There are people who have pregnancies that they want to keep private from certain people, either in their lives or their employer or anyone else. And then, unfortunately, also people who are disproportionately affected are those who are accused of crimes when they are seeking medical treatment for a variety of pregnancy outcomes. So I want you to ask yourself, as we go through these next couple of slides, what are some other circumstances where somebody might actually be worried about the disclosure of the data that's collected by the platforms that you're on, your internet service provider, even just like having these things physically on your device that you carry around with you every day. So next slide. Thank you. So this disclosure can have pretty serious consequences. And I think it's important for us to remember that, we're used to talking a lot about often the legal consequences, but so many of these things are personal consequences as well. Many of the folks who are seeking assistance around pregnancy are afraid of revealing a pregnancy to a partner or to a parent. They're in sometimes a violent or at-risk situation. There's also targeting from advertisers after a miscarriage, which, like Amanda said in her slides around Facebook, that some of this content can be very triggering and upsetting. And then, of course, we know that folks can, in the course of trying to receive services, actually be misdirected on different platforms by targeted advertising on platforms like Google Search to anti-choice services and facilities. And we know, of course, that unfortunately, a lot of this data is then used to back up the criminalization of pregnancy, as well as abortion and miscarriage experiences. So next slide, please. So, I mean, what can we do? I think it's really important to know that there are tactics and methods that we can take to kind of reduce our own risk footprint, as well as the footprint of the folks that we work with. I know many of the people on this call deal with that every day. So next slide, please. And then Amanda, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, so you can actually take control of what affects you from all of these threats that we just talked about. This is something called threat modeling, where you look at all of the possible concerns and risks, and then you pick and choose what practices are specific to your risks, so you can get the most bang for your buck when you're doing digital security tactics for yourself. So we're about to run through a bunch of recommendations. It's not necessarily a to-do list. Rather, as we go through the recommendations, think about what you're most worried about, or what you think a friend or a community member might be worried about, and then you can pick and choose what tactics you want to use yourself and what advice you want to share with other people. So next slide. So if you're concerned about the advertising data that we talked about, one of the best things you can do is disable the ad ID that's on your phone, social media, and Google. As you go about doing this, you'll probably trigger a warning that says, like, you'll get less personalized ads. Your ad experience might not be as high quality. That is a good thing. That's what we want. So yeah, don't heed those warnings. Just proceed with limiting the data that you share. Again, we'll be sharing these links with you, but you can also just search turn off ad ID on whatever platform you're looking into. The best thing to do here is to turn it off for your phone. So every Apple or Android phone, your phone comes with a personalized ad ID. And so everything you do on your phone can be kind of anonymously connected, not so actually anonymously because of the ad ID that's kind of built in with your operating system. So you can turn that off on your phone, and then Facebook and the Facebook ecosystem and the Google ecosystem also assign you an ID that can track your information across different platforms and across any sites that are then sharing information with Google Analytics or with Facebook Pixels. So you can turn those personalized ad IDs off as well. Next slide. We also really recommend limiting the location data that you share. This can protect against some of that advertising based on locations that you've been, and it can also protect you against geofenced ads, which is where someone says, you know, I want to show this ad on Snapchat to everyone using Snapchat in this location on this day. And anti-abortion folks have used the geofencing to target people while they're at abortion clinics. It also protects you from reverse geofence warrants, which is when the police say, I want, you know, all the data from Google about all the phones that were in this location at this time. And that can end up with like innocent people being, you know, connected to a crime that they might not have anything to do with. Law enforcement can also buy location data. A lot of apps request location data and then use it as a way to make money. So for example, the US military bought location data from a Muslim prayer app. And although these terms of service about sharing your data promise that it's you know, anonymous and de-identified, there's been a lot of evidence that that information can be pretty easily de-identified. Most recently, a Catholic priest was identified and outed because of location data bought from Grindr. So we really recommend turning off location sharing. You can either turn off location sharing completely for your whole device, or you can turn it off app by app if you do want to actually share your location with certain apps. And just a note that you can still use apps that need your location, like Uber or Lyft or Google Maps, with your location turned off. You can just type your address in. So sometimes it's worth putting in that little extra effort of like typing your address in rather than like when you want to use the app, rather than giving the app access to your location all the time, even when you're not using it, and then having them turn around and sell that data. Next slide. I'll pass it back over to Kate to take it from here.
Yes, so when this particular tactic I think is really important when we just talked a little bit also about potential criminalization of activities or suspicion of criminalization. It's really important for you, for I think not even just your work in and around abortion access, but in most of our lives we really should be protecting our phone with a strong PIN. All iPhones and most Androids are encrypted when you add a PIN. This is a really cool piece of technology. It basically means that I can't steal your phone, pop it open, take out the drive, plug it into a different phone, and then be able to access all your data. It gets scrambled when it's locked with a PIN or turned off, and it is only unscrambled when you add your PIN back in. So if someone demands access to your phone, you can decide that it's safer to give them the PIN than to resist. Our colleague Cynthia Condi-Cook actually calls this kind of process of dealing with it, especially in the context of, say, an arrest, to be oppression management. And you are going to have to decide whether you feel safe refusing a search, but rather it's really important to know that you both have this right and that that right is enforced by having a strong PIN on your phone so that your consent or a warrant is required to unlock it. So yeah, this is combined with other tactics that help limit your data on your phone to kind of minimize that risk. So the next slide, please. And this is actually really helpful to protect against unauthorized access to your browsing history. I would say this also helps because it limits the amount of data about, say, searches on pregnancy or periods that's linked to sort of the rest of our lives that we have in our phone and on our search habits. So you can use an incognito or private browser window, which actually deletes the browsing history for that session. We have specific instructions that you can use to open a private window on most of the major browsers. And then you can manually clear your browsing history in Safari, Chrome, or Firefox. It's important to note actually that there are also settings for this specifically in Google. If you are a Gmail user, frequently use Google search. One of the things that's really helpful is that now Google will sort of be defaulting to limiting the amount of time that data is kept. So that's pretty cool. And if you want to advance to the next slide, I will hand it back to Amanda to continue on our tips.
Oops, sorry, forgot how to unmute for a second there. Yeah, another recommendation is to use search platforms that protect your privacy. So As Kate mentioned, Google is now offering more options that you can customize, but you really have to dig into the settings and look for them. So another option is to use a platform like DuckDuckGo instead of Google as your default search engine. Because search histories have been used to criminalize people for pregnancy outcomes, using something like DuckDuckGo would protect you by, because it doesn't store your search history at all. So they don't keep any records about it or share it with advertisers. And you can set it as your default browser, so you don't even have to think about it. You'll just automatically be protecting your privacy whenever you do a search. Let's go to the next slide. So another platform that can protect your privacy is Firefox and Firefox Focus. Firefox automatically protects against third-party trackers when you're using the browser, and it also has some really cool like container features so that if you are looking at Facebook, it blocks those trackers that Facebook tries to use to monitor your information as you're browsing across the internet, so that you can look at Facebook and use Facebook without giving Facebook all of the rest of your browsing information. And Firefox also has a really cool app for your phone called Firefox Focus, and it automatically clears your browser history when you close the app. So if you are searching for anything sensitive, that way you don't have to remember to go in and clear your browser history. It just happens automatically for you. It is important to note that other browsers may work better with certain apps like Zoom. So it's okay to pick and choose which apps you use for what. So for example, I use Chrome a lot for my day-to-day work that involves Google Workspace, since Google Workspace is really optimized to be used with Google's browser. But then when I'm just kind of, searching for fun, I'll try to use Firefox so that I don't have to consciously worry about all of the trackers. Next slide. And we also really recommend choosing chat platforms that respect your privacy as well. There's some end-to-end encrypted chat apps that we really recommend, like Signal. And what these chat apps do is protect against your phone company having a bunch of data about your text messages. And they can also help protect against someone else seeing private messages. End-to-end encryption means that the messages are only decrypted on your phone. And so even if Signal got a subpoena from law enforcement, they don't have access to your messages to turn over. This is in big contrast to your phone company, which keeps copies of all your SMS texts plus metadata about who you text and when. So this might also be of concern if someone else pays your phone bill. Whoever pays your phone bill and has access to that login can see all of the metadata about who you're texting, when you're texting them, how often you're texting them, and they have that data for your calls as well. So just to put less metadata out there into the world, we really recommend something like Signal. We also recommend that you choose privacy-focused apps like Signal over advertising-focused apps like WhatsApp. You might know that WhatsApp and iMessage also use end-to-end encryption, and so that's great for security. However, both WhatsApp and iMessage encourage you to make unencrypted backups of your chat, or they're encrypted, but they're not end-to-end encrypted. So Facebook can't necessarily get access to your WhatsApp chats if they're just in the WhatsApp app. But if you or the person you're messaging on WhatsApp have chat backups turned on, Facebook can access your chat records through those backups. So that's why we recommend something like Signal, because they don't offer insecure options like that. And so you can be sure that you and the person that you're texting are both using really strong security, because the Signal app won't encourage you to do something like use unsecure backups. And I'll pass it back to Kate for the next slide.
All right, and as a bonus, it's really important to turn on disappearing messages in Signal. It's one of the great features that it offers. One of the things that we often are not thinking about when we go through situations like being in an airport or needing to cross borders in particular, the pressure to unlock your phone can actually be pretty intense. I would say this also applies for situations where you might be detained after a protest and other scenarios. And these disappearing messages prevent somebody with access to your phone from seeing those past messages. Basically, they can't obtain what's there if it doesn't exist at all. So it's one of these really great features. You can actually determine the length of time that you want it to stay around before disappearing. It can be a week, it can now be a month if you prefer, but often we recommend, especially depending on the context of the conversation, just exercising your right to decide how long that you'd like that data to stay around in the world. So especially when discussing things like a miscarriage or an abortion experience, it can be a really, really great peace of mind and privacy. So next slide, please. And if you really want a super anonymous way to browse the internet that basically also ensures that not only do the various sites that you use to search not retain your data, but also your internet service provider does not retain your data, you can use something called Tor, which is a very interesting, useful, super anonymous browser. It is definitely got a little bit of a learning curve, so feel free to download it and try it out. It's generally relays your traffic through so many locations that it becomes more anonymized. It's a little bit slower, but it is great for that peace of mind. Or you can use a VPN. So basically, VPN or Tor both work to essentially relay your traffic, like the sites you're visiting and potentially what you'd be searching on something like Google, to other parties who then don't retain that information about where it came from. It's kind of cool because both of them can also work on mobile carriers. So if you don't want your phone company, who basically is your internet provider for your phone, to see that traffic, you can utilize it there as well. They're pretty effective. I would say that you should pay for a no logs VPN. While Tor is free, VPNs are certainly a product, and if you get a free one, generally your logs are being sold somewhere to compensate for the costs, but they can be very, very affordable, so we recommend that few dollars a month, especially if you feel like you have that increased privacy need. So next slide, please. And then one of the things that's we're now distributing to try and back up this information is to have this wonderful story as told via a zine. We have our Digital Defense Fund zine on knowing your cyber civil rights. We tell the story sort of some of the issues that we deal with around pregnancy privacy and especially abortion privacy as told through some little birds and their journey in dealing with issues around found eggs. So we can see here that did you hear there are new laws regulating found eggs, and then they note that the egg police have been created to enforce this new law around how you can resolve that situation. If we go to the next slide, throughout this, of course, this zine, we kind of go through some various ways that we just discussed actually right now to mitigate, and this little pigeon and her friend the duck will help us to figure out how these tactics, none of these make it 100% secure to break an egg and potentially break the law, but it makes it harder for your pet and pay more for your data if you're accused of it. And I think it's important to know that we can all protect our phones, browsing, and communications to build a culture of security and safety, whether or not we particularly are experiencing a pregnancy or an abortion. And I think that that's one of the things I'm really excited that we get to share with you as part of the links at the after this presentation. So next slide, please. Again, we'll have some resources that will follow up here. There's some illustrations that we have that are actually for you to be able to download and share. Everything you just saw with those wonderful pink slides with illustrations, they are together in a pack that is ready for things like Instagram or Facebook or wherever you would choose to share them. They're yours to ensure that that info gets out to our wonderful community. So we can see these and additional resources at digitaldefensefund.org/learn. So next slide, please. And some additional resources you'll get, which kind of summarize a little bit more if this is interesting to you and you want to do a deep dive on surveillance technologies as they affect these issues. So next slide, please. And with that, thank you so much. I'm really delighted to just pass this back to Caitlin. And Amanda, I know we're very, very grateful for your time on these important issues.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Kate and Amanda, for that amazing presentation. I feel like I learned so much. I took so many notes. I'm going to take a few seconds just to talk about how what we just learned about fits within the context of self-managed abortion. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So to start, just so we have a shared understanding of what we mean when we're talking about self-managed abortion, self-managed abortion is a broad term that includes all methods someone may use to end a pregnancy. So that may be medications or herbs or other methods the person may be familiar with. It's important to note that no method of self-managed abortion should be shamed, and it certainly should not be criminalized. Everyone should be able to have an abortion on their own terms. So that, of course, means being able to go to a clinic and get care, but it also means being able to get care within the privacy of your own home. At Reproaction in particular, we focus our education work on abortion with pills, and that's because self-managed abortion with mesoprostol is about 85% effective in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Unfortunately, we don't have time today to go through the whole protocol, the WHO protocol for self-managed abortion, but it is up on our website, and I encourage you to check that out if you're not already familiar with it. With that, we can go to the next slide. So why are we talking about this? This year has already been the worst on record for abortion rights, with states adopting 90 restrictions in just the first 6 months of the year. And we know that the pro-life movement has been working for decades to overturn Roe v. Wade and make abortion illegal. And this has particular urgency today because we know the balance of power at the Supreme Court has shifted to judge justices that would eliminate the constitutional right to abortion. We know following the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett last year in October 2020, that conservatives have the majority they need on the court to overturn or gut Roe. Though abortion is legal in the U.S., and I want to emphasize that legality is not acceptability and that abortion has not been acceptable to many people in this country for some time, despite abortion still being legal, people are already being sent to jail for self-managing their own abortions in many states. And it's important to highlight that the logical consequence of abortion bans is to send people to jail. So what should you know about digital security and self-managed abortion? The first is that information about self-managed abortion belongs in the hands of everybody, but there's a difference between sharing information and giving medical or legal advice. By only sharing and giving information, we minimize our risk of prosecution. While in some states it is not legal to perform your own abortion without a physician, it is never a crime to share information about self-managed abortion. The other key thing to know is that the treatment for a complication for an abortion is exactly the same as the treatment for complications related to a miscarriage. There's no test that can detect mesoprostol, and there's no reason to tell a medical provider that someone has managed their abortion with pills. To date, we know that there have been at least 20 arrests of people who've ended their pregnancies outside the medical setting, and therefore, if somebody does need medical help, they should not disclose that they have taken abortion pills. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to check out our campaign online, including that protocol for self-managed abortion. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Erin.
Wow. Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Kate and Amanda. My head is about to explode, and I am so concerned about that intersection of digital security and pregnancy, periods, and reproductive care. So it's been a ton of information. I know folks probably have a lot of questions. They're starting to come in. I encourage you to start typing them in now. Before we move to Q&A, I'd like to, as Caitlin shared, we have a whole host of resources on self-managed abortion with pills on our website. You can find that at reproaction.org. You can put in /SMA and then I'll take you directly there, or you can find it from reproaction.org under our campaigns. And we also encourage you to follow us on social media. We are Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. After, of course, you've disabled ad tracking and started using private browsers as advised. And we would also like you to save the date for our next Act and Learn webinar. We run these every single month, and they are open to the public. Next month's topic is really important, particularly given all of the attacks that we've seen in the media on trans youth. And that is specifically, we'll be doing a deeper dive into what does good look like? What is gender affirming care for trans youth, and how can we as a society, and also we as activists and advocates support our trans youth in getting what they need. So that will be taking place on Friday, August 27th, and that will be at noon Eastern. If you sign up for our email list at reproaction.org, you will get an invitation to come. So we really want you to be there. And so with that, I'm going to go into Q&A. So the first question I have is for our partners at Digital Defense Fund. Are there any, this is a trust but verify question, have there been any other reviews or other credentialing agencies that have verified the security of things like Signal, DuckDuckGo, and Tor that you've presented as secure options?
So just to kind of give context, actually one of the really remarkable things about Signal in particular is that it is what is called an open source project. So it is something that the code for it is posted online. It's available for folks to review. There's actually wonderful white papers and items that are written by researchers who then go in and try to break it and post their results publicly. Changes and fixes are also public as a result. And many of the other types of solutions that we discussed actually go through the same level of research and disclosure. One of the more interesting things that we get to use to verify whether or not some of these products, especially things like, say, a VPN, actually work the way that they say they do, is that sometimes they're taken to court, and we get to look up a lot of the information that says that, like, okay, well, when this VPN or this particular search engine was sort of implicated and received a warrant to disclose the information that they had, we can see in those court documents that they actually did not have anything, or that the logs had no other identifying information attached to them. So I think it is absolutely important to trust but verify. And I think just knowing that these are some of these kinds of tactics you can use, like when I find something new that claims to be a security product, sometimes I'll go ahead and Google you know, the name of the product plus open source to find out if it is. Sometimes I'll even Google like court case with the name of that to see if they were forced to disclose that information. A lot of these companies and products actually also disclose it even on their own blog to kind of verify all the time for you as the user and other interested researchers exactly how it works and what the latest results were. So this is a fantastic question. So thanks for asking it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the thorough answer. Okay, so I am going to admit something that I just did. There were 3 questions that came in that were excellent, and I just accidentally deleted one of them when I was asking that question to Digital Defense Fund. So if your question is not one of the next 3 and you put it in, I'm not ignoring you. Please put it back in. We'd love to ask it. So the next question is, does the drawn pattern locking mechanism on cell phones encrypt data like the typed PIN does?
I can take this one. Yes, so that is a way to add a PIN to your device. So all iPhones are automatically encrypted when you add any kind of PIN, and most modern Androids are, but if you have an Android, we recommend that you go into the settings to just double check because some of them are opt-in for the encryption. However, draw patterns I've read are less secure than like a long alphanumeric PIN. And so if you are using a phone that allows you to use an alphanumeric PIN, I know iPhones do this. I'm an iPhone user, not an Android user, so I'm less familiar with them, but I believe Androids allow you as well to like use a alphanumeric PIN instead. And having something that is 6 digits or longer, for each digit you add, you drastically increase the security of the device and make it harder for someone to guess the PIN. So we recommend using a longer alphanumeric password for your phone if possible, rather than the kind of draw pattern. But if you're using a phone where adding a PIN encrypts the data automatically, then a draw pattern would do that.
Thank you so much for that answer. Okay, so the next is the remaining question I have. If you don't hear your question asked, please do put it back in. So This is a question from Elizabeth. Do you have workspace recommendations for organizations? We currently use the Google Suite, which feels very unsafe, but it is the most convenient and accessible. This is so relatable. I also am dying to hear your answer, Digital Defense Fund.
So Google Workspace, we actually use it at Digital Defense Fund as well, because in terms of protecting you from unauthorized actors like hackers, Google is actually really good at that. They invest a lot of money and power into keeping their servers secure. And then we can also use Google Workspace's admin settings to keep our accounts secure by requiring a long password, turning on two-factor authentication and requiring that for everyone. And we actually have a guide to Google Workspace security on our website. If you go to digitaldefensefund.org/learn and go to the guide section, you can see our guide for all the different settings you can turn on in Google Workspace to increase the security of that for your organization. And Kate, do you have anything to add there too?
I think I want to harken back also to our slide that was on sort of like the divided up responsibility between ourselves and then the platform. Like Google, one of the reasons that we often recommend that that a large institutional provider like Google can be effective is because they are frequently battle tested. It is very, very hard to break something that is run on a like major platform product like Google or like Microsoft 365 or equivalent. I think the thing to remember then as well is that each of those platforms, and this is like every piece of institutional software you use, from like Slack to Microsoft to whatever it is you have, actually has a responsibility that they are given by our legal structure to try and police use of their platforms for crime. And that often most frequently means things like use of spam and financial scams. But I think it's important to remember that if there are things that they are obligated to disclose, as is pretty much every other entity, with a warrant, they have to turn over certain information. And so some of the things that you're going to want to think about when you're thinking about where I'm going to store certain things, we often try to encourage folks to get in the habit of escalating sensitive conversations off of platforms like that, and then ensure that they are in a place where that information is simply not kept. It's not always super convenient to have to use things like Signal to escalate a conversation, but we think it's really important. And honestly, even just taking control of your data on the platform you're using, like G Suite or something else, and just knowing that like you don't have to keep all of your email forever, you don't have to keep every document forever, and just kind of like being more mindful as we move through all of those spaces of like what we keep, why, for how long, and how much of it. I think it's just going to be a helpful supplement to any use of something like G Suite.
Thank you so much. Our next question is really dear to my heart. So we, in addition to the self-managed abortion campaign that Caitlin ran through on this call, another major campaign that we work on at Reproaction is our Bad Faith Medicine campaign, and it's specific to anti-abortion fake clinics, which systematically mislead and shame people seeking abortion care. And we have a question here from Bayard asking, can you talk about what role HIPAA and HIPAA exemptions have in data collection with regard to crisis pregnancy centers? Like, are women or people who book appointments at anti-abortion fake clinics going to start getting Instagram ads about baby toys, formula, and things of that nature?
I can jump in here first. So, oh gosh, HIPAA has been like such a buzzword in the news lately, and it's, revealing, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about HIPAA protections. HIPAA only applies to health insurance and doctors' offices pretty much. So health information that people voluntarily share with a non-medical organization like a fake clinic isn't actually protected by HIPAA. If the clinic employs a doctor, then they could be considered an entity that has to follow HIPAA. But HIPAA is also mostly about consent. And so if you sign something at your doctor's office that says they can share information, that they can text you about it, that they can share it with their business associates, then they can share, you know, all of your health information as long as they've technically gotten your consent. So, oh my gosh, now I've forgotten the details of the question. Kate, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember then that usually when we're trying to set, like I'm going to try to remember the details and hopefully interpret them correctly as well. Generally speaking, one of the things that is really, really important is that the amount of information, like who is bound to help uphold those constraints of HIPAA is often determined by like something called a business associate agreement. So if I use something like G Suite and I'm trying to, you know, use it to at a clinic, I absolutely can. There is a sort of process you go through that basically signs Google as a business associate agreement with an entity like Google to be able to utilize that in a HIPAA compliant way and ensure that I have access to all the tools I need to like, you know, get consent from my patients and things like that. Unfortunately, because most of these facilities are not considered you know, medical facilities, they probably, I mean, here's my guess, they certainly would have no obligation to sign any such agreement with some of these companies. So a lot of the information then that you disclose or that's held on different platforms is sort of not enjoined to the same rights that you would normally have to not only not have that information to reveal to others, but also to not have any recourse for when it's leaked or breached without your consent. So hopefully that helps to understand.
Thank you so much for that. And Caitlin, since folks were asking about anti-abortion fake clinics, and I know we've got a lot of activists and advocates on the line, how can people engage with Reproaction's campaign to hold anti-abortion fake clinics accountable?
That is a great question. We have lots of information about our campaign up on our website, and towards the end of our campaign page, you'll find tons of resources for you to take action on this issue in your own community. In addition, if you sign up for our email list, we send out a monthly bad faith medicine breakdown that keeps you up to date with everything you need to know about the campaign, as well as what these fake clinics are doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to also thank Caitlin, who resurrected the question for me that I lost. So what can, back to Digital Defense Fund, what can non-service provider organizations do to take action on this issue of digital security and reproductive health?
I would say really, really big one is that a lot of the information that you've seen here is definitely available on our website. We are trying really hard to ensure that, especially information about keeping your own pregnancy experience, abortion period and period experiences private, finds better ways to reach the people who are sort of like at the point of like searching for that information. We think that organizations and individuals can really help us kind of change the culture of security to know that not only are there, you know, safer search options available, but that also like you have the right to keep this private, and then especially in any like sensitive situations, that there are better tools than there have ever been to not only help you to like, you know, communicate about that experience with someone else using, say, something like Signal instead of a text message. So it's a lot safer of a conversation, but also just to understand your cyber civil rights. I think we often all don't remember that we have the right to, when we feel safe doing so, to refuse a search, that we all have the right to due process, to an attorney, to a warrant. And I think, honestly, changing that sort of culture and helping each other understand that, like, you know, exercising your right to defend yourself against unlawful search and seizure is part and parcel to the right to obtain an abortion. And I think each of us can help kind of, as Caitlin really wisely said, help ensure that we close the gap between like what is technically legal and what's accessible. So any ways that you can help us figure out how to make the technology more accessible to the folks that you work with and in your communities, through your work, through different kinds of education, putting it in your own words, being your neighborhood or organization's expert for questions, we would love that. It would just be really great to see that grow.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
if I can real quick, there are folks that think that using end-to-end encrypted apps is suspicious in and of itself, rather than like the logical thing to do in an internet where we're constantly spied on. And so the more that you can use things like Signal or Tor or a VPN in your kind of day-to-day life on the internet, the more folks that are using those, the more kind of legitimacy they have, and the less likely it is for someone's use of Signal or Tor or another secure app to be portrayed as being suspicious. So all of us using these digital security tactics can kind of create a community of safety to help folks who might be using them, you know, because they need to evade censorship or something. Yeah.
So the last question is that I'm seeing right now is if an anti-abortion fake clinic dispenses so-called abortion reversal medications, are they not required to follow HIPAA? And I am going to take a personal privilege to share more with our listeners about this. So anti-abortion fake clinics have been peddling this unproven theory that an abortion with pills can mystically be reversed mid-course if they administer a treatment. The problem is they haven't, that has not gone through scientific study and it hasn't been proven. And so in fact, what they're doing is they're putting people through an experiment without telling them. It's unethical. And so no one should expect that anything having to do with so-called abortion pill reversal is following any medical or ethics guidelines, because in fact, what you have is anti-abortion ideologues providing medical care or pretending to provide medical care, who are giving supplements or pills or injections to folks to supposedly reverse a medication abortion. The reality is that they don't know if it works. And as I said, they're targeting people who they are already targeting going into fake clinics. So it's heavily falling on young people of color. So I hope that helps answer your question. No. Are the anti-abortion fake clinics protecting people's privacy and rights? The answer to that is no. And they certainly are even potentially endangering their health by putting them through an experiment and not even telling folks that they're putting them through an experiment. So with that, I am going to issue just strong thanks to our colleagues at Digital Defense Fund, to Kate Bertash, to Amanda Bennett, and to Reproaction's own Caitlin Blenny for an absolutely spectacular Act and Learn webinar. We will be following up with an email that will have a recording to the webinar and all of these links, so keep an eye out for that to come in the coming days. And I hope everyone has a very good weekend, and also please stay safe. Thank you again.